So, hi everybody. Thank you very much for joining us today for the webinar Developing Sustainable and Resilient Food Systems for Healthy People and Planet. It's brought to you by the British section of the Institute of Food Technologists. My name's Rihanna Gamble. I chair the British section, and in my day job, I work for IFIS, the International Food Information Service. I'm very pleased to introduce as our first speaker, Dr. Lara Ramdin. Lara is the Chief Scientist and LA Ambassador for FoodxClimate, and she's also board member and SciComm Chair of the Upcycled Food Association and Chair of the IFT Trends Group. Lara's previous roles include Chief Innovation and Science Officer at Upcycled Foods Inc., Chief Innovation Officer at Dole Sunshine Company, and Head of Innovation at Molson Coors Beverage Company. And while Lara gets her slides up and running, I'm going to do a few housekeeping points, which I was meant to do before introducing. So Nicola and Lara are each going to speak for about 15 to 20 minutes today, after which there'll be the opportunity to ask questions. You can send your questions in at any time during the session. Just use the Q&A function or send them in during the chats, and then we'll hold on to them until the Q&A starts. And over to you, Lara.
Thanks very much, Rihanna. I'm delighted to be here from a sunny, but not yet warm, Los Angeles, because I'm wearing a jumper. I am originally from the UK. I'm based here in the US. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how to build a resilient food system by building in circularity to your food systems, but also by starting at the end of the food cycle and looking at food waste. So I am a big fan of AI, and I think it has many, many positive uses. And I'm always fascinated to understand the evolution of prompts and how you sort of teach it to learn. And I asked ChatGPT to create a visual of what the current food system looks like based on current information available. And this is the visual that ChatGPT gave me. So it's resource scarcity. It's a very, very warm planet, as witnessed by Rihanna sweltering in Berkshire at the moment. It's a huge amount of waste in landfill. It's ice caps melting. And obviously, this is one of the reasons why we do what we do. Obviously, all of us here are interested in how to create a food system that's resilient, and also is able to feed everyone on the planet. But I thought it was interesting that ChatGPT is already able to determine what our food system and our planet looks like. I usually start all my presentations with this fact because I think it's sobering, and it's a stark reminder of the issue that we're dealing with when it comes to food waste. So 38% of all food that's produced is wasted. It's an extraordinary amount of food. And I know that all of you here probably think that you know about food systems and food system design, and you probably don't waste any food at home. But the truth is, a lot is still going to waste at home. In fact, if you look at this chart from Refed, and by the way, if none of you are aware of Refed, I highly recommend that you bookmark refed.com. They're a not-for-profit think tank who provide essentially all the data, all the meaningful data when it comes to food waste. They're kind of like my Bible, and they do update this insights engine every year. And you will see that the largest amount of food waste comes from residential. So that means everybody here on this call, the 30, 40 people on this call, we're all contributing to that 38% of food being wasted. Where my work has mostly been focused is that manufacturing, that burgundy segment, the manufacturing, the 14.4%. But we aren't going to make a significant change to food systems and the way in which we approach them if we don't tackle together the way in which people treat their food, the way in which they buy their food, the way in which they use their food at home. We are doing a lot in many of the different sections, whether they're food at the farm level, at the manufacturing level, and food service, but it's not moving the needle because that 38% hasn't changed for a number of years. So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on how to get a significant shift in consumer behavior when it comes to how we treat food. I like to use these two numbers to kind of level set as to the size of the problem. I mentioned that 38% of all food made is wasted, and that's equivalent to around 146 billion meals worth of food. And there, in the US at least, there are 47 million people who are food insecure. So when you think about the equation, the math doesn't math, right? Here we are sitting in this wonderful food system, and on this end here, all these meals are being wasted, and on the other end here, all these people are hungry. So that has kind of led me to the work of, well, how can we use what is being wasted to create a greater wealth of accessible nutrition or nutrient-dense foods, put that back into the food system, and therefore create more accessible nutrition. I'm personally not interested in working in food systems that only really create food systems for people that can afford it. What I'm really interested in is using science and technology to reutilize food waste to create more accessible nutrition for everybody, so that we don't have to be faced with that number of 47 million people who are hungry in the US. I want to just take a moment to talk about upcycling and the upcycled certified standards. I think many of you know that the upcycled standards have been in place since around 2021. I think it's pretty I think it's pretty cool that a group of entrepreneurs got together in 2020 and decided that essentially they wanted to set up the association, the industry association. And then they got all these esteemed experts from Harvard Law School, from ReFed, from UC Davis, and also some people in Food Waste Australia, a global group of people who came together to create global standards. And I admire that greatly, because they didn't wait for someone to come along and say, no, this is how you should do it. They actually used their network and brought a group of people together to collaborate and said, no, that we're going to create the world's first upcycled foods standard. The reason why I mention it is because version 2 is actually in discussion right now and should be launched sometime in May, and that we're looking at whether or not it will be expanded beyond upcycled foods and ingredients. And we've had a public comment period, so I think the version 2 will be published in May, and then there'll be another public comment period. So I hope everybody here will take the opportunity to read version 2.0. You may ask why it's important to have a standard. And this is a topic that we'll discuss at IFT First in July, by the way, if anybody's coming to Chicago in July. I think new claims like upcycled, regenerative agriculture, organic, they're rife for greenwashing. And certainly as a scientist, I feel it's really important that we put guardrails around what upcycled foods is. And I think it's important to have a standard. And I'm sure I'm preaching to the converted here. Because it's easy to say the word upcycled, it's another level to actually be upcycled and also get certified. It's a pretty easy process. The bar is quite low on purpose, meaning we encourage more and more people to reutilize waste and put that back into food systems. So the barrier is 10% inclusion of an upcycled ingredient in a product in order to be certified as an upcycled food product. So I think any of us who are food system designers can and should be looking at food system that way and building in circularity from the get-go. Just in case you didn't know, this is the official definition of upcycled foods. So upcycled foods use ingredients that otherwise would not have gone to human consumption. And essentially, in the process of becoming certified, you need to demonstrate that this food and or ingredient would otherwise have ended up into landfill, and therefore has a positive impact on the environment if you upcycle it and put it back into a human food system. I always like to add a little bit of business to these things. So if, in case you were worrying about whether or not this actually is going to generate revenue, you're a food systems designer and not sure whether or not there's a need, the upcycle food market is expected to reach 128 billion by 2037. It's currently 61.1 billion. That's across all categories. It would be my fervent wish that in order to embrace circularity in everything that we do, that it just becomes a mandate, that this upcycled standard of including a minimum of 10% ingredients in a food system just becomes a mandate, the same way as we have done with plastic in the UK by including 30% post-consumer recycled content. I mentioned earlier that the upcycled claim is being made across many, many different products. I will say that I see a lot more products making the upcycle claim that aren't certified. And if I were a consumer, even if I didn't fully understand what upcycled was, I think it's important for there to be a sort of badge of honor in the same way non-GMO, organic, fair trade. And when the association started out and when the standards were first put in place, those were seen as the benchmark. I think as a consumer, I want to know that it has been certified in some way. And I will say, as a group of food systems people, upcycled certified is the only way to guarantee the authenticity of your supply chain. So I'm delighted to see here, obviously, in this research that the claim certified upcycled is growing. Recently, I went to a presentation by Nielsen, and the upcycling claim is one of the fastest growing claims. It's still emerging, and it's not as big as regenerative agriculture. That's a whole different webinar, by the way. But I see that more and more people are interested in the idea that we're getting value out of waste. You'll see, and this is no surprise, I've personally worked a lot in the bakery and snacks category when it comes to upcycled ingredients, and you'll see this, you'll see it is by far the biggest category that's growing in the upcycled world. We're also seeing a lot more upcycled ingredients going into pet food. And there was a discussion last week at San Francisco Climate Week about whether or not what the impact of putting more and more upcycled ingredients in pet food is from a carbon footprint perspective. So because this is obviously domestic pets, this is not agricultural animals, but we'll come on to that hopefully in the discussion. Many of you might have seen this already, but this is obviously a brewer, and he's scraping spent grain. This is after the brewing process. He's scraping spent grain into a bin. And actually, what's interesting about that spent grain for me is that it's full of nutrition, and it's full of fiber and protein and micronutrients that will provide or can provide something healthy for anybody to eat. And a lot of the work that I have done has been utilizing spent grain flour and putting them into baked goods, into cakes, cookies, and snacks. And I like to think of a upcycled flour from spent grain as kind of being a fortification. So imagine if you can get it into foodstuffs without people realizing almost. I'm not into food shaming people, so I'm not the type of person that says, no, you should eat this and you should eat that. But I do try every available occasion, whenever I meet anybody, to try and remind them to eat their recommended daily allowance of fiber, rather than taking a fiber pill, actually try and eat it through food. I don't know if any of you are aware, but the Ellen MacArthur Foundation over the last couple of years have run a big food redesign challenge. And the challenge was to essentially create a product using a certain proportion of upcycled ingredients and also ingredients made from regenerative agriculture. And in my previous role, we were a finalist, and I made, together with some other partners, a nature positive naan, which included 28% upcycled flour, and the rest of the flour was from a regenerative source. And the point of entering this challenge was to show that actually circular food design is possible. It's possible both from a price point of view, but it's also possible from a joy point of view, because I think one of the things that we worry about a lot is whether or not people will want to eat upcycled food, and whether they'll enjoy the taste, and whether they'll enjoy the experience. And myself and also the 70 other companies that were in the cohort, that were in the finalist cohort, were able to demonstrate very clearly that food can be circular, it can use upcycled ingredients, it can use ingredients from regenerative agriculture, and it can be delicious. Speaking of deliciousness, this is a chef, Chef Michael Ayub. He has a restaurant in Brooklyn. It's called Fornino. This is a pizza that he made using, as amongst other things, upcycled spent grain flour. And I like to show this picture because who doesn't love pizza, number one? And doesn't this look delicious? He looks very happy, and his customers were very happy as well. I think the challenge for food system designers is that the upcycled ingredient, when it's come from food waste, when it's been upcycled, can often behave differently. It can have a different color, it can have a slightly different taste. It technically behaves differently in a dough system or in a snack system or whatever it is. And I think the challenge is for food system designers to use all their formulation skills to formulate around that. But I use these pictures to demonstrate to you that upcycled food can bring joy and can be very tasty. Here are some of my my colleagues in the upcycled world. Matriarch, I'm sure, is familiar to all of you. Matriarch and the team, Anna Hammond, are working at the farm level to upcycle vegetables. This is the world's first carbon neutral tomato basil sauce with 100% upcycled tomatoes. So these tomatoes would otherwise have gone to waste. She also has an SKU that goes straight into food banks here in the US, which is a harvest stew. It's been designed with chefs, and this you can buy in retail, but the harvest stew and other SKUs go into food service. I can guarantee you that the tomato basil sauce is definitely very tasty. And also accessible. And as I said, I bring you back to the original point I made, which is that I'm only interested in working in food systems and designing food that's available to everybody. On the left-hand side is Wayward Spirit. As the name suggests, this is made from upcycled whey. This is an alcoholic beverage. I know that's not for everybody, but I just wanted to show the diversity of the types of products can be made from upcycled ingredients. And Emily Darchuk is doing very well with Wayward Spirit and has built lots of partnerships. It's a white spirit, so think of similar to your vodka, vodka-based spirits. And then on the right we have Seven Sundays. Seven Sundays is a cereal brand here in the US. I don't know whether it's available in the UK, but it's also using upcycled material, upcycled oat material. And this month in April, we've only got 2 days left actually, but I may as well say it anyway. Every box that's bought, they are donating the proceeds to the Healing Soil Foundation, which is a foundation in the Midwest that supports farmers build essentially regenerative agriculture farming, and has been a lifeline recently for farmers in the Midwest who were expecting grants from the USDA, and they were obviously all frozen, and the Healing Soils Foundation provided emergency bridging grants, which, as I'm sure you can imagine, was really a lifeline for farmers in the Midwest. I wanted to give you a couple more examples of how upcycled foods can be accessible, but also tasty and represent resilience. So on the left, this is a yogurt drink from Arla, which has been made from upcycled whey. And top right-hand corner represents Renut. So Renut are a company based in Switzerland, and they have a proprietary process that can essentially process the whole nut all at once. So keeping all the nutrients from the hull, which is obviously mostly fiber and protein. It's pretty revolutionary because particularly in the almond industry and in the almond milk industry, obviously you have to separate the nut from the hull, and then you've got all these hulls left over. So Renut have looked at upcycling slightly differently and said, instead of having the hull and upcycling the hull, we're just going to keep the hull with the almond in the first place and actually process the whole nut together and create material which can then be used to make almond milk. In the bottom right hand corner are our friends in Israel. Fenolives actually upcycles the olive stone and creates an olive stone flour, which is being used currently in baked goods. So why am I showing you all of these things? First of all, I wanted to show you that there's diversity in the types of products that can be made, consumed, enjoyed from upcycled ingredients. I wanted to demonstrate to you that waste is more than waste. Food waste has value. Food waste can feed people. Food waste being upcycled into food systems, creating circular food systems, can reduce food waste going to landfill, but also create a greater diversity of accessible food in order to reduce, ultimately, hunger. At least that's my hope, and that's my dream. I think, yes, of course, from a challenges in the upcycle food industry. One, all of these efforts need scale, right? Because when you're making a flour, when you're making almond substrate from a nut that's been used as a whole, when all of these things require processes, and if you are using a process, then you have to invest in technology. And if you have to invest in technology, that means this upcycled ingredient is slightly more expensive than the standard. And one of the challenges, or one of the many challenges that exist in the ingredient world, is that if you're a food system designer and you're faced with two ingredients, and one ingredient is this price and the other ingredient, even though it might be sustainable, even though it might be upcycled from food waste, is 1.5 or 2x versus that standard ingredient, it's very difficult at this moment in time, given all the pressures that we're facing in food, to use the ingredient that's a bit more expensive. So we do need a wider adoption, and we do need scale, because these ingredients and products will decrease in price as we get scale. And then, as I mentioned at the beginning, we're still seeing this big bucket of around 40% of food waste coming from people at home. And so that behavior change requires a lot of work. And it also impacts the way in which consumers perceive food that comes from an upcycled source or from waste that has been reutilized. And so we have a lot more work to do there. And I'll leave you with this. When it comes to what we can do, apart from buying upcycled foods, apart from including upcycled ingredients in your food systems when you design them, I think there are a number of routes through technology that are doing really good things in order to reduce waste. So Flash Food exists here in the US, and it's linked to a number of supermarkets on the West Coast, but it's now expanding. So if you download the Flash Food app, the participating supermarkets will then notify you in your area when food is near its expiry date or is about to be thrown out or whatever, and then you can pop along to your supermarket and pick up that food at a reduced price. So it's a bit like in the UK, the yellow label, but the yellow label has been brought to an app and has been brought to a sort of a more interactive experience. Olio, if you're in the UK, obviously it started in COVID and started because two female entrepreneurs decided that they didn't want food to go to waste, and in their community they wanted to start something where people could share food if they were going away, if something was going to go off in the fridge, which I think is an amazing idea. And obviously a couple of years ago Tesco signed a collaboration with them. Too Good To Go is also a technology, is an app, and that's for food service. So if here in the US, if you download Too Good To Go, then you can pick up food from different restaurants. You can pick up bread from a bakery at the end of the day. You can pick up leftover food that's going to be thrown away. I think it's an excellent way to encourage people to understand the value of food before buying new food, essentially, and creating more to food waste. And last but not least, we have Mill. Mill is actually a very fancy bin or trash can, and the mill bin is around $400, and then you subscribe to a service, and the service will take away your organic waste and compost it for you on a monthly basis. I do also want to recommend there are benchtop composters available. Lumi is a great one. It's around $500. It's really discreet, and if you're interested in composting, I'm going to leave it there and hand over to Nicolas. Thank you for your attention, and I hope I've convinced you that upcycling, you reutilising food waste and putting value back into your food systems is the way to go. Thank you.
Thank you, Lara. I thought that talk was absolutely fascinating. There was some eye-opening statistics in there, and also some great tips for reducing food waste in the home. I'm personally already a really big fan of Too Good To Go. I think it's a great app.
Right.
And also the examples that you shared of how industry players are upcycling. It was inspiring. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
So I'm now pleased to introduce Dr. Nicolas Bordenave. Nicolas is Research Director for INRAE, the French National Research Institute for Agriculture, Food and the Environment, and also Adjunct Professor at the University of Ottawa. Nicolas sat on IFT's Board of Directors from 2021 to 2024, is Scientific Editor of the journal Comprehensive Reviews in Food Science and Food Safety, and Nicolas is also Associate Editor of Critical Reviews in Food Science and Nutrition. So over to you, Nicolas.
Thank you very much. Rihanna, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay,
Thank you.
sounds like a yes. All right, excellent. Well, thank you very much for the invitation and the opportunity to talk about upcycling foods. And I think it's a great opportunity to talk after Lara, because and she showed us all the potential of upcycling foods and how that resonates with consumers. Now I'll give you a bit more of a researcher perspective on that, and how the research community, what the research community can do to actually bring upcycled foods on the market from a technical perspective, I would say. And what I would try to advocate for is some sort of a systemic approach, and I'll hope I will I'll clarify what that means, that systemic approach. As a researcher, there is one thing that is extremely important to me, and not only to me, all the researchers actually, it's funding. And I'll give you a bit of a flavor of what funding looks like in the food area. And what you can see here, is the evolution of funding at the European level for food. And what you can see is actually the framework programs from actually, I think that started probably around 2014, and it's going to the current framework program. And what you can see is that these framework programs are divided in clusters, and the original cluster was food, agriculture, and biotechnology, and in another cluster there was the environment. And that changed in the next framework program, where food security, sustainable agriculture, and they all came together under the same kind of funding. And they were funded at the level of about 4 billion euros between 2014 and 2020. And the current program, it's food, bioeconomy, natural resources, agriculture, and environment, and at the level of around 9 billion euros over 6 years. And what that means for a researcher is that now it's the EU strategy to future-proof, I would say, food and health through sustainable food systems and bioeconomy. So now you cannot do any kind of research in food science and nutrition without thinking about sustainable food systems and the environment. And that's perfectly in line with the FAO's challenge about sustainable and healthy diets. So it's really interesting that it's the EU strategies, comes to life through funding and kind of forces researchers to go into that avenue of sustainable food systems. So as I was telling you, that aligns perfectly well with the guidelines from the FAO about sustainable and healthy diets. And the question now is really about how to serve consumers to address that challenge. And so, and I think that ties in quite nicely with what Lara was talking about. What should we do to serve consumers through, with products that fit in that sustainable and healthy diet? So first of all, I mean, it's kind of obvious when you work in the food industry, the products have to be acceptable and adoptable by consumers. So they've got to be technically performant, they've got to have good taste, aligned with values and culture, and that's what we know classically as the product's value proposition to consumers. That's how the products should be. Now, if we only do that, we don't tackle the sustainability challenge. And as most of you may know, sustainability has three pillars: the economic sustainability, societal sustainability, and environmental sustainability. And so what that means is that any kind of food product also has some form of value proposition to stakeholders, I would say in the very general term. These stakeholders being the environment, public, policymakers, the citizens as well. Which can be distinguished from consumers for that matter. Well, in short, that's how the product should be made and brought to consumers to be considered sustainable or being part of a sustainable food system. And so we developed a strategy or concept with a group of researchers across Europe that's about the holistic value proposition for food products or ingredients that would support sustainable and healthy diets. That means that we have to incorporate all the three pillars of sustainability with acceptability and adaptability by consumers to make a product that would fit within the sustainable and healthy diet challenge from the FAO. So now, how do we turn that into a reality? That's it. These are the minimal requirements to support sustainable and healthy diets. We've got to improve resource efficiency, so minimizing waste, for example. We've got to tackle pressing nutrition issues. And I was glad to hear Lara talk about fibers, because you'll hear about that in a few seconds. But there are pressing nutrition issues. Some are less pressing, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And we need real life effectiveness. So we need to make these foods or ingredients in a profitable way. We need to have that in foods that are adaptable, acceptable, and affordable. So with these requirements, well, there is a lot of research, a very, very high amount of research that's been done on plant proteins. And it's great because it improves resource efficiency. Sorry. It's important to reduce intake of animal proteins as far as the CO2 emissions are concerned. There are good examples of business profitability around plant proteins. Now, the question that we have with the group of researchers that I work with is that tackling a pressing nutrition issue? And data actually shows that no, we collectively, so I'm not talking about very specific populations, but collectively at a very general level, we've got enough proteins. This is not really an issue in terms of amount of proteins that we eat every day. On the contrary, something that we miss, that most of us miss, is dietary fibers. And there is a nice way of addressing that challenge, that we've got plenty of crops that we can use that are either wasted, or there are some fractions that are wasted, and there are plenty of fibers there. So there is an opportunity to improve resource efficiency by using them, and also to tackle that pressing nutrition issue that is the fiber gap. If I remember well, on average, so I would limit myself to European citizens, but it can be generalized very easily. But we miss between a quarter and a third of our daily fiber intake, and this has tremendous cost on healthcare system, on what else? I mean, on many things, sorry, I'm losing my words here, on life expectancy as well. Well, so that fiber gap is really, really important to tackle. And we've got an opportunity. It's all the plant byproducts that are wasted throughout food production. These plant byproducts are already utilized, and there is an established model that integrates them into the agri-food system. So that's very good in a way, because it's already a step towards increasing efficiency of resources usage. And there are many functional food ingredients that are made from plant byproducts. And many of them, there can be thickeners, emulsifiers, stabilizers like pectins and gums. For example, pectins that can be extracted from citrus peel or from apple pomace. So it's already ways to create value out of waste and as food ingredients. They can also be colorants or antioxidants. So there are many things that are already done. Now, on the downside, that way of valorizing plant byproducts is that these ingredients have little nutritional added value. They are hyper-specialized functional ingredients, and well, unfortunately, they tend to participate to design hyper-palatable, energy-dense foods. You will not hear me say ultra-processed foods, because that's a very sensitive topic. So you didn't hear me say that, but essentially, these kind of ingredients participate to formulating foods that, well, it would be good to limit in our diets. And on top of that, extracting these compounds from plant byproducts generates further byproducts which are poorer, because they have less opportunities of valorization. So the way plant byproducts are currently used, it does not really fit into that model of sustainable and healthy food systems. So what we're trying to propose is another way of tackling that, because all these wastes and fibers are available in significant volume. They are a nutritional profit loss if we think about fibers and phytonutrients. And so what we're trying to propose is to valorize them without fractionation. And this is where there is a huge challenge, because they come in different colors, different tastes, different forms. What can we do to valorize them without splitting them into subcategories or single molecules, which I just showed you may not be the right way to do. The one way to do that is to use a model that was developed by some colleagues of ours in Sweden at Chalmers University. They have developed an integrated approach of product development, what they call sustainable product development. It's a conceptual framework that integrates sustainability right from the concept of the ingredient or the concept of the food. It sounds very generic like that. I can share more details if you want, but the idea is there, integrating sustainability right from the start in order to have in order to tackle the challenges of the three pillars of sustainability. So I will give you an example of a research program that's ongoing in my lab and in collaboration with other lab. It's valorization of apple pomace. The current situation is that we've got apple products. So I hope that everybody can see my pointer here. We've got apple that are produced to make applesauce, juice, cider, and then delivered to consumers. And that creates wastes in the form of apple pomace. So the pomace can be cake, the press cake, or it can be the peels. It can take many forms as well. There were many attempts to valorize that, biorefineries in particular, but never really successful because it was not profitable or not adapted to the sector structure. So what we're proposing is to take these wastes, and my colleagues hate when I say waste. They call it just byproducts or co-products, but well, for consumers it will be waste. And the nice thing is to give value to these wastes. So we want to create a novel value chain that will go from apple processors to consumers, going through ingredient manufacturers. And how we want to do that is to transform apple pomace into functional ingredients, and again, without fractionation. How can that happen? I won't go into all the technical details, but what we want to do is control that digital matter. It's a fibrous matrix, essentially, by controlling that destructuration and restructuration in order to have functional fibers. Sorry. For that, we really need a deep understanding of the needs and constraints from the sector, from consumers, and about the products as well. What you can see here in the yellow heart of that picture is all the issues that we need to tackle. Obviously, sensorial acceptability, that's the first thing that we've got to tackle. Usability, processability. If we make ingredients from apple pomace, then it's got to be incorporated nicely by food manufacturers, by the users of these ingredients, and it's got to have nutritional functionality in order to have that added value for consumers and for public health. Now, that being said, this is what we really tackle at the technical level now as a proof of concept, but there are other tackles that we need to tackle later on. All the contaminations, for example, microbial, biological, and chemical safety. Apples are some of the fruits that are the most treated by phyto, how can I say that? Phyto treatments. Sorry, I'm losing my word here. But essentially, apple pomace contains a lot of pesticides or metabolites of these pesticides. And we don't know yet if we valorize apple pomace into a food ingredient, do we concentrate these traces of pesticides? And what do they become through processing? How do the pomace is stored? And so are there problems of microbiological contaminations? How are these contaminations maybe transported throughout the processing value chain? And that some kind of things that we don't know yet, and we need to tackle when we have a good proof of concept. So there are also issues about traceability, economic viability, environmental footprint. That's obvious, and it's probably the easiest to tackle. And having a life cycle analysis, decent and relevant life cycle analysis, will be important. Economic viability is a tricky one, because if there are ingredient manufacturers that manage to create these functional ingredients from apple pomace, well, they create value and gain value out of that processing. And it can be argued that the apple growers could benefit from that added value as well. So essentially, it asks the question, how should the added value be distributed along that value chain? And another question to illustrate these kind of issues, if we create ingredients that make food that are enriched in fibers, functional fibers that are effective, in products that are acceptable, adoptable, affordable, then there is potentially an issue here. It means that we have products that have added value as compared to the conventional products. That added value is normally something you pay for as a consumer. But does that play into good nutrition for everyone? So the affordability part can be a little bit tricky there. Will there be consumers that can pay for that functional ingredient and others that won't? That wouldn't be in the logic of sustainable health systems. So these are all questions that we're trying to address beyond just the technical part that you can see here: sensorial acceptability, usability, and nutrition functionality. And we've got collaborators in the fields of food safety, economy, and also consumer science to help us frame that. And so we're trying to do that with that deliberate approach of being sustainable from the start. So if we manage to tackle that challenge, to address that challenge, so then we'll check everything. We'll improve resource efficiency, tackle pressing nutrition issues, and we'll effectively have real life effectiveness. But again, that's an ongoing project. It's research that's currently being done in the lab, and I hope that very soon I can give you updates with positive results. But that's kind of things, that kind of approach that we're taking to address that challenge of sustainable and healthy food systems. So as I was telling you, the point is just to embrace that dietary fiber nutritional challenge with available resources, which are the plant byproducts. And as I was telling you, the current way of valorizing plant byproducts is probably not completely satisfactory in all perspectives. So we are trying to move from the yes, but to the yes, and we can have the ingredients for that give value to product to fraction that would be discarded anyway. We can provide value to public health through nutritional functionality. We can hopefully provide value to the economy by doing it in a way that's profitable, and hopefully do something good for the planet. So through the appropriate use of plant byproducts involving all actors, that's what we need to do, from growers to consumers. Hopefully we will tackle that challenge. And I hope that illustrates some of the nice concepts that Lara has talked about just before me. And with that, I'll thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Nicola. That was another fascinating talk. And we've already received our first question through on the Q&A. So we can get started immediately with that. Okay, so Colin Dennis, he has two questions. The first one is for you, Nicola, and then the follow-up question is for you both. So Nicola, why was the apple chosen as the target for upcycling?
Thank you for that question. Thank you, Colin. Apple, so there were two reasons. One is very, very mundane. My lab has experience with apples, so it was maybe a little bit easier to get started with that. When you know the raw material well, it makes it a little bit less hard to work with it. But from an economic standpoint, apple waste is one of the biggest waste in volume across Europe. There are about 2 million tons of apple pomace that are produced only in France yearly. So that's a huge opportunity to valorize fibers. Only if it was only with apples, then we could cover already a significant portion of the nutrition gap, not only in France but in Europe as well. So apple was not too bad of a target. And I would add that it's also these byproducts are not too hard to work with in terms of color, and they are kind of neutral in taste as well. So it's a kind of a easy entry point into that field.
Fantastic, thanks, Nicola. And the follow-up question for you both is, what other crops would you view as high priorities?
Lara, do you want to go with it? Yeah.
It's a good question. Somebody else asked me that as well, actually. I think so. We don't have a categorization of sort of waste reduction, but I do think that reutilizing waste at the farm level, particularly when it comes to produce, in my personal opinion, would be a priority, because it spoils easily and it's a source of a particular kind of nutrition. And at least in the US, access to fruits and vegetables is very diverse. It really changes quite significantly depending on where you live. I mean, I have never come across food deserts before until I moved to the US, and we were trying to tackle them at Dole. Actually, we're trying to bridge that gap. So the idea that there are people in the US growing up in certain locations where there isn't access to fruits and vegetables is something that I find a bit heartbreaking, really. So if there's a way to, if there is a prioritization from my perspective, it's at that produce and farm level. And then I'd say nutritionally, it's still a battle to try and get Americans to eat their recommended daily allowance of fiber. And in fact, they sort of reject foods that have fiber or high fiber on the label. And so I think there's probably a bigger, deeper problem there. But I think definitely trying to find ways to upcycle plant-based protein and plant-based fiber and put that back into human food systems is a priority too.
Great, thank you, Lara. Nicola, are there any crops that you would like to add to that?
There are two that thinking about. So in terms of volume, there's one that is huge, and that represents a good opportunity. It's tomato, tomato byproducts. The only problem is their color. But if color can be managed, then that can be nice. The other one I can think of is everything that's related to cereal byproducts. So whether there are straws or husks in hulls, there is a big potential here about valorizing their fibers. But it's about the same problem as for apples. It's all the contaminations are there. Contaminations throughout, treatments and pesticides or storage that makes it difficult. It's probably a little bit less easy on the technical level because, so I'm getting a bit technical here, but it's mostly cellulose, which is a bit harder to functionalize, whereas in apple or tomato or other fruits and vegetables, then there is a good mix of fibers that can be tailored more easily. But in terms of volume, cereal byproducts are a huge opportunity.
Great, thank you both. Our next question is from Susan Arkley. And Susan asks, to what extent are consumer attitudes towards upcycled ingredients or foods a limiting factor in their acceptance, and what research has been done on this?
Do you want to, could you repeat the question, please,
Yeah, of
Ariana?
course. To what extent are consumer attitudes towards upcycled ingredients or foods a limiting factor in their acceptance, and what research has been done on this?
Well, I would say that the research is ongoing. We still need more research on it. I think there has been some research that in various different pockets, also in Europe, there's a group in Denmark who's quite prolific in this area. There's been some work done in Sweden, and I've been working with some colleagues at Bowling Green University. They're about to release a study as well. So first of all, I would say versus some of the other things that are going on in food systems, the research is limited. Number two, I think it's constantly evolving, meaning I think when the Upcycled Food Association was launched and the standards were put in place, I think most product and or ingredient owners would tell you that they sort of really lent into that waste messaging and really talked a lot more about that waste reutilization. And as the movement has continued, we're sort of moving away from that, because obviously when you mention the waste, there's sort of a high disgust factor, and so we're leaning much more into this idea of rescuing nutrition and really focusing on the nutrition and the taste aspect, and really not mentioning much about upcycling is a nicer way to say that you're reutilizing waste, right? So I think but it's still a challenge, and it's a challenge for food system designers, because as I mentioned, any ingredient, I mean, when you come to produce, when it comes to upcycled produce, so it's a tomato sauce, you don't know that the tomatoes have come from an upcycled source, right? They look exactly the same and they taste exactly the same. That's, I would say, a relatively easy thing to create something delicious from. If you're creating a flour from spent grain, that flour is a darker brown, it has a slightly nutty flavor, it's mostly fiber and protein, so there's no gluten in it, so it doesn't perform like a normal flour.
Sure.
The challenge for the food systems designer is to include that ingredient in a food system and almost disguise it. And I think and so not all food systems accommodate, if you're trying to include it in an existing food systems, not all food systems, the resulting product doesn't look exactly the same way someone might expect. So one of the biggest challenges is talking about it, but moving away from waste, but then also getting the consumer to expand their palate. So if the naan that we did for the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, it was a much darker naan, right? So, and in the UK, I think that's okay, because people look at that and kind of go, well, it's darker, it's got more fiber in it, it's healthier. And that's in baked goods, but in other categories, there are certain expectations which might not be the same. So I say the bigger challenge is we're still figuring out the language, and we're still trying to get people to expand their palate, basically.
Mm. Very interesting. Thank you. Nicola, is there anything that you'd like to add to that?
Oh,
No.
thank you, Lara, for that comment about the language. It's I love the word upcycling. It sounds very positive and very nice. From a European perspective, I would say that, well, the problem is that we've got to use other languages as well. In French, for example, there's no one single word for upcycling, and actually most of the words that we use are don't sound that nice. One that can, well, there are different words depending on the regulatory status actually of the product. And if I translate literally, one kind of byproduct is called underproduct, and it sounds very much like waste, but it's
Yeah.
the official way of calling that. So actually, a way to work on the language is not only on consumers themselves, but also on regulations, so that the wording becomes more positive and is more readily accepted by consumers. So, and I'm talking only about French, but I think that German is the same, and other languages as well. So it's also a cultural challenge from that perspective. And I would echo what Lara just said about the group in Denmark. Actually, Jessica Aschermann-Witzel is a leading researcher over there in Aarhus University, and she's part of the consortium that I'm leading on that thing. And she does a great job on understanding consumer acceptance of upcycled foods. So I recommend looking at her work.
Yeah. Amazing. Thank you very much for sharing. That's a challenge that hadn't occurred to me. That's very interesting. I'm going to invite Bertrand, who is also a panelist on the call, Bertrand, to join us because I know he has a question for you.
Thank you, Rihanna. Actually, can you hear me okay? Yeah, it's actually linked to the whole discussion about acceptability here. And what do we feel the potential is through pet food? I think, Lara, you mentioned pet food in your talk, and also animal feed. So actually using that, all these upcycled products through animal feed and or pet food.
They are already used as animal feed. So if spent grain doesn't go into a process to essentially dry it and create a flour that's safe for human consumption, it's a wet material that just goes to animal feed. So I used to work for a brewery, and the spent grain goes to pig feed. It's the cheapest way for and the quickest way for any brewery to kind of dispose of their spent grain, right? So it is going to animal feed. The point that was being made, this was at a project drawdown session in San Francisco, is we've not done the measurement to show what that contribution is. So if you're sending waste to an animal that feeds on it, whether that be a pig or a cow, versus sending the food waste to landfill that creates methane that way, is there a difference in the footprint? Nobody's done the analysis on that. And I think that there are a lot of people that believe that the food system should only be plant-based, and certainly the evidence is pretty incontrovertible that a plant-based diet is better for you and better for the planet. But I think there's also a lot of people working to create a better system, a better ecosystem, but including animals. And so if animals remain included, and I think that they will, and they're eating ingredients, food that comes from a waste stream, and it's upcycled it's going back into animal feed, what impact does that have on the environment? We don't know. Actually, we've not done that measurement, is the point. But pet food using upcycled ingredients is a growing category. The original, I guess, the OGs of the upcycle categories were snacks and beverages. They were the two biggest categories, but now we see pet food growing as well.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And
was there anything else you wanted to ask, Bertrand?
I just whether there are any learnings from all the work that's going on for the mission to Mars, because that's the ultimate, truly, sustainable food system, where you have to, because obviously they have to be really circular and make sure they can actually sustain and create food that is good for the microbiome as well. So I guess there will be a lot of interesting research coming out of that.
Fantastic. So we are past the hour now, so we're going to have to wrap up. And I'm sorry there were a couple of questions that had been sent through that we haven't been able to get to today. But thank you everybody for joining us, and thank you so much, Nicola and Lara, for your fantastic presentations. I think they were so inspiring and interesting, and as you can see in the chat, the attendees have really enjoyed it. So thank you so much. And just to let everybody know, we will of course be circulating the recording if you would like to rewatch. So thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you
Cheers.
very much.
Bye.
Good evening. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you.